Hello everybody, I'm Jerry Schubel. I want to talk to you about communicating science to the general public. And some of you remember a famous line, "You're talking to me," that was from Travis Bickle in the movie Taxi Driver starring Robert De Niro. Well, I'm talking to you, and I'm particularly talking to those of you who are scientists. I want to make some suggestions of how to communicate your science more effectively to the public. And it is far more difficult than communicating with one's peers. To communicate, you have to have both a sender and a receiver. And when we talk about the general public, you can have as many receivers as you have individuals in the audience with whom you are trying to communicate, each with his or her own narrow bandpass filter, and each with an attention span of a gnat. And if you don't get to them in the first 15 seconds, you probably will not. It is far more difficult than communicating with one's peers. Now, I lived in the academic world for most of my professional life, 20 years at Stony Brook, 14 years at Johns Hopkins, and it was in 1994 that I went over to the dark side. At least that's what a number of my colleagues called it. I want to talk to you about some of the difficulties of communicating with the public and what I learned from the dark side, because we live and die by our effectiveness in communicating with the public using both verbal and non-verbal messages. As professional scientists, most of your time is spent talking to other scientists, to members of the tribe. We have a common language, a common set of acronyms, and every one of us, as you've already heard, is very careful to make sure that our professional colleagues is aware of, that we know that of all of the exceptions to everything we're going to say. And by the time we get through enumerating the exceptions, you miss the major point with the public. All of us are used to PowerPoint slides filled with equations and lots of text. We're used to death by PowerPoint. And most of you in the audience have inflicted it upon others, and I'm sure you have even yesterday, and I know throughout my life I have done it many times. Our preoccupation with detail may serve us well with our professional colleagues. It does not serve us well with the general public. And this has been referred to as the curse of knowledge, and it's something most scholars suffer from. In speaking to the public, what one has to do is regain what cognitive psychologists call preconceptual innocence. You have to be able to put yourself in their place before you knew all of these things. The best advice that I've ever found is in a book called Made to Stick: Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Fail, by Chip Cox, who's a professor at the business school at Stanford, and his brother Chip Heath, and his brother Dan Heath, who's a consultant in North Carolina. And their ideas are captivated in a mnemonic device called success. Simple, unexpected, concrete, credible stories. And with simple, the idea is, don't dumb it down. Quite the opposite. Elevate the message. Use a universal language. Get to the core idea. Get to the essence and get rid of the jargon. And analogies are a good way to dodge the curse of knowledge. Simplification is how every one of us deals with complexity every waking hour of every day. And when it comes to science, it's far better to have the scientists do the simplification than leaving it in the hands of the general public. Now, I include in this science journalists also, but it's better to have the simplification come there. Einstein cautioned that we should make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. Unexpected. As you've heard from Ken Weiss, unexpected consequences get the public's attention. What is it in your story that's counterintuitive, that would jolt your audience into paying attention and remembering the story that you have to tell? Concrete, avoid abstractions. Use specific examples. Now is better than the year 2100 if you want to get to the public. Local is better than global if you want to get to the public. And credibility is a very important currency. You earn it day by day, year by year, over a lifetime, and that's also how institutions get credibility, and you can lose it very, very quickly, much more quickly than it takes to build it up. Emotional, making people care so they act. Emotions are value-based beliefs that are our own personal filters, and each of us has it. If if a person in this room thinks that he or she is objective, I suggest you rethink that. And if we've learned anything about communicating science from climate change, it should be that adding another set of facts is not going to change the way the public believes and acts. It comes down to emotions. And stories are key. You've heard that from the previous two speakers. A credible idea makes people believe. An emotional idea makes people care. And the right story makes people act. In the world that I live in now, in aquariums, but I suspect it's true of all informal science institutions, what we have to try to do is to unify, to simplify, and magnify. Unify, put things in context, provide perspective. Framing becomes very, very important. Simplify, as I've already said, get rid of the jargon and speak the language that your audience is familiar with. There's a wonderful little book called Experiments in Ethics that was written a couple of years ago, several years ago now, by Kwame Anthony Appiah, and this is a quote from his book. Quote, "Scientists often are guilty of redescribing the familiar in unfamiliar terms." I spent most of my professional life doing that. That's magnify, amplify the main message, repeat it, and repeat it often. And make the message relevant to your life. Now, I want to quote again from this book, Experiments in Ethics. The games we play. He makes a very important point in this book, that in life the challenge is not so much to figure out how best to play the game. The challenge is to figure out what game you're really playing. What game do all of you in this room play? If you are scientists, researchers, then you are engaged in pushing back the boundaries of our scientific understanding through research. You're involved in training the next generation of scholars. And perhaps you're involved in using your advances in knowledge in solving problems, in our case about the ocean. But your primary rewards come from publications, citations, sponsored research support, and graduate students that you mentor. There may very well be three legs to the academic stool: public service, research, and teaching. I was a dean for more than 20 years. If anybody ever tells you those legs are of equal length and that person is your department chair, don't believe them. I would encourage you, all of you, in addition to all the good advice you've already heard, I would encourage you to be more involved with informal science education through informal science institutions. Don't worry about trying to become great communicators of science. You're not going to get credit for that in terms of promotion and tenure, and we treat our public scientists very poorly in this country. It doesn't contribute to your stature among your peers in general. Now, there are some exceptions to that, not very many. So I think, though, that one of the most effective ways is if you partner with your local informal science organization, whether it's an aquarium, a science center, a natural history museum. Because most of these institutions have very little scientific bench strength. Very little, even if they think they do. They play a different game. Their expertise is not in science, but it is in packaging and distribution. Packaging scientific information that makes it engaging and educational. And the richness of those packages depends to a large extent upon whether they have partnerships with outstanding scientists. And if you look at the distribution of these institutions, they're wholesalers. The best scientists not only are retailers of information, they're boutique retailers. And when you think about the issues we have to solve, we've got to get these stories out to hundreds of millions and eventually billions of people, because we have so many what are now called wicked environmental problems. So I would encourage you to use your partnerships with local museums, and this is a great way to satisfy NSF's criterion 2 broader impacts. It's a lot better than giving a public lecture on the campus that very few people in the public will come to. Finally, I would encourage all of you, though, not to underestimate the importance of framing. The public needs context and perspective to make ideas stick. Whether it's climate change, marine mammal strandings, the great video that Ken just showed, I think unless we put these in a larger context of a more just, more equitable, more sustainable relationship of humans with our planet and with our planet's living life support system, we are going to lose this environmental game. And I would close with one word about hope. While hope is not a strategy, I think it's equally clear that without hope, no communication strategy will be effective. And many of us have been guilty of being too depressing and too shrill in our messages. There's nothing wrong with taking the public down to the depths of despair, as long as you bring them back out and show them there's a way to deal with these issues. So while hope is not a strategy, I think it's an essential ingredient and every message we deliver needs to be infused with some element of hope. Andy Revkin, environmental journalist with the New York Times, said that in the last century, the two phrases that characterized the environmental movement were, "Woe is me," and "Shame on you." And he pointed out that he had been guilty of falling prey to those seductively simple phrases, but in this century, we need a new brand of environmentalism. It's got to be bold and brave and daring, and I think that if we do that, I'm convinced that we have the knowledge and the technology, and we have a new commons. In addition to the global commons of the ocean and the atmosphere, we have the information commons. For the first time in the history of humankind, we can share data and information across the globe instantaneously. We can build community, not by sending pictures of us half-dressed or undressed, but building communities around big issues and scaling it up. The only way we solve a global problem is through local and regional approaches that are scaled up. And that at the bottom it says, not many of you may agree with me, but thank you anyway.